It says a day without wine is like, well, just kidding, I have no idea. Which I really like this sign, and we sell these for $10.50 if anybody wants one. So we're pretty close to getting started here. We have a representative from Bozone Brewing Company tonight. I think I look really old in this lighting. I can turn on some lights or something, but I'll be back in about like 3 minutes, get this started. So thank you and see you soon. All right, let's get this show started, huh? What is it? Is it Thursday night?
It is Thursday.
I thought maybe just putting Kathy next to me would make me look younger. So instead of lighting, I just went with that. The first thing we want to do tonight is Mark from Bozone Brewing Company has recommended us to do the Amber Ale first, the Pale Ale second, and the Honey Kolsch third. So if you guys want to know what the recommendation is, that's it. It's also on chat. So we also have taken a lot of criticism for not having, no, I wouldn't say a lot, a little bit of constructive criticism for not having Great Falls brewers on. And our theory was that you guys have been to all these breweries and tasted a lot of their beers. And when this is behind us and we can open again, we are going to have a local beer craft night at our store, and we'll have everybody there and we'll support the local breweries too. We just thought it'd be fun to have things that maybe you guys don't get to taste in Great Falls as much as you would, you know, the local guys, but we definitely want to support them, and we love Tara especially, and well, I guess her husband more, and Tara loves to go support these people. And I just want to say that I've been on an excellent beer adventure personally, calling it the Mark Johnson Beer Adventure. It's kind of I think I've drank more beer in the last few days than I have in the last 10 years. And I've learned a lot. I hope you guys have too. We've had a lot of fun with all these guys, and Mark that's on with us tonight, which, I mean, how can a guy named Mark not be, you know, good looking and smart and knows a lot about wine? I mean, beer. I'm so bad at this beer thing. But I've gotten my friend Ron Bibler down in Bozeman, or Big Sky. He and I have been friends for probably 30 years, and he keeps sending me emails and texts and whatever about, because he's a big beer guy. He's been on a lot of beer tastings. He's like, I loved his first comment to me was, so you're doing things a little bit atypical from the normal beer tastings I've been on. I'm like, because I don't know anything about beer, so we're just making stuff up as we go, right? So fifth and wine, we always like to start with that because, you know, we don't want to go broke. So here's what we got about that. We did the perfect amount again today of our specials, and everybody ordered, and we can't imagine the community support that we've gotten. It's just unbelievable. Tara and I are talking about it again today. It's just crazy how you guys and other people that aren't on here are supporting us and getting us through this. And we can't say thank you enough, honestly, from the bottom of our hearts. It's fun. One of our night cooks, our main night cook, came back to work today to start getting prepared for May 5th, which is a Tuesday, because there's no way we're going to open on a Monday, even though they said we can. We're not doing that because we don't like to work on Mondays. And so we're gonna open on May 5th, and we're gonna have a limited menu. And it's been really fun. She and I and Tara and even Heather from Eagle, we've been talking about what are you gonna do in the interim while you only have 50% of the people that you can serve, and you know, all the restrictions and whatever. And so it's been fun to come up with a menu. And I think I told you, Jake, my son and I were in Spain, and everything is in Spain involves eggs. So we got that on the menu. I'm so old that let me see if I can find it here. I wrote out a menu today, like on paper, because I like that better than typing. And you get to be creative. And we were on the Google. We used to have a girl that worked for us at Allegra, called it the Google machine. Anyway, we're on the Google machine today and just having fun creating new menu items. And so I think we're gonna have a blast. And it's not gonna be everything that it was right away, because we just can't do that. But whatever, it'll still be fun. Let me see what else I got. I got more stuff. I just got to read about it. Oh, next week we decided we're gonna do a final for wine tastings. So we think after this whole thing kind of winds down or a bit, that maybe people won't want to drink every night. And so we decided next week you guys would probably still all want to drink every night. And then I guess these things aren't going away. We're not going to do them every night, at least. So we're going to do, we've got some really superstars coming on next week for the wine tastings. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen Bottle Shock, but it's a cool movie. And one of the characters in there is Bo and Heidi Heidi Barrett. And they're one of the ones that win the 76 Paris tasting. Their daughter, Heather? No.
Chelsea.
Yeah, whatever, one of those
Chelsea.
Names, Chelsea, right? Heather, whatever. She's going to be on Thursday night. We have a really fun guy that looks exactly like Sam Elliott on, I don't know, one night. So that's the night we all have to wear cowboy hats. So we'll put that in the email that everybody, if you're going to join that night, it's required you go get a cowboy hat. I'll show you the picture in the email, or Tara will. It's like, that's fun. And then we're bringing back Javier from Spain, because he was our most popular, right? Well, I don't know about most popular, but very popular. And I can't remember who else. Well, I would really want one, and Heather's arguing with me, and so we haven't decided on that. But anyway, we'll have 5 wine people on next week. And we will definitely do beers again. It's been fun for us to, you know, I guess maybe Tara knows. I know nothing about beer, so it's been fun for me to learn. Like, and I'm gonna be a beer expert pretty soon, I'll bet. So anyway, I think that's about enough about Fifth and Wine. Please continue supporting us. Thank you for all the support. And we have the privilege tonight of Mark from Bozone Brewing Company. And I think maybe, Mark, if you wouldn't mind, we'd start out with kind of the story, because you guys are one of the oldest breweries in Montana, and kind of the story of the brewery first before your own personal story, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for joining me this evening. It's really nice to see a bunch of friendly, smiling faces. Obviously, as a sales rep, that's normally what I'm encountering on a day-to-day basis. So this whole time has felt really weird and strange and lonely. So thank you for reaching out and joining me today. Our brewery got started back in 2001. So I think from a numbers standpoint, we're like maybe the 8th oldest brewery in the state, something around there. But we got started when Todd Scott and Lisa Scott, his wife, wanted to continue brewing. Some of you might remember a brewery called Spanish Peaks that originated here in Bozeman. They made Black Dog and Raspberry Wheat. I'm seeing some heads nod. And Todd was the head brewer at that brewery for most of its existence. And when they decided to opt out of Montana living and move to California, Todd said no thank you for obvious reasons and decided to purchase their old equipment and start up Bozeman Brewing Company himself. So he bought up their old 7-barrel system. The building that we're still in right now is where he got everything rolling. And initially, for the first 5 years, he was basically the only employee that the brewery had. So he made the beer himself, kegged the beer, delivered the beer, went on sales calls. His first child was born basically the same month that the first batch of beer was finished. And he started taking her on sales calls to convince bars and restaurants to buy his beer, that if they didn't buy the keg, he wouldn't be able to buy diapers or formula or stuff like that. So
Perfect. I love that.
he's always been a pretty good salesman, knows how to tug heartstrings and get people laughing and that sort of thing. He's still very good at that. But since then, we've continued to kind of grow and expand. At this point, we have 13 full-time employees. We have another dozen or so bartender staff that are all part-time. We're kind of an interesting circumstance. Everybody bartender-wise is here basically 1 day a week. They do it because they love being here at the brewery, not because it's their work. Everybody's got full-time jobs most of the time, and so they come here and they hang out for a shift and see the regulars. And at this point, having been around for 20 years, we've got quite a few of those. So that's what kind of started us off. And I'll try and do some screen sharing. We'll see if it's going to work properly. If Tara will activate that for me, that would be great.
In the meantime, if you don't mind, Mark.
Go for it.
I would love to, because I love to tell stories, and there's lots of old people on here. Old, probably younger than me, but anyway, what I remember about Bozeman when I was a kid was Bozeman was a rodeo cowboy town, the Ag College. I remember Olympia beer was big down there, and
yeah.
And then Missoula was like the hippie town and the pot smoking and whatever. And so things have changed a lot. Well, I guess just in Bozeman. But anyway, I think that, so it's weird to me that Bozeman is so different from my childhood, and what you guys were kind of the impetus to kind of start stepping that up, I think, there, according to what I read on the website, right?
Yeah, there's a little bit of, it's interesting. We have discussions about this because Bozeman is such a kind of unique town as far as the university is concerned, and the fact that, like you said, it's always been sort of a cow town. And there's still an awful lot of Bozeman that is still very much cow town. We've got a little kind of spot right in the middle of town that is a city, and then the rest of the valley is still farming and ranching, and that's what a lot of that whole surrounding area still is. So you get this interesting mix of sort of cosmopolitan and also that mix of like outdoors and rancher and hard work and all that sort of stuff, which I think is what brings people to Bozeman. All the transplants are here, I think, for that same reason too. They like being outside. They like the work ethic of Montana, and Bozeman offers that to folks. So I think that's a starting point for it. We're gonna see if I can do, nope, not yet. So to kind of continue talking, we're a brewery that produces about 6,000 barrels worth of beer a year, which, to put that sort of into a little bit of perspective, when you see one of those big kegs at a bar or sitting on a loading dock or something like that. That's technically a half barrel worth of beer, and it's got 15 and a half gallons in it. So a barrel's worth is going to be 31 gallons worth of beer. We produce a little bit over 6,000 of those barrels a year. So by Montana standards, we actually hit kind of right in the middle from a scale standpoint. We're not super big. We're not a Kettle House or a Big Sky, or even a Bayern or a Red Lodge or a Lewis and Clark, but we're still doing pretty solid for our size. We're the biggest brewery in the Bozeman area, and that's kind of a nice position to be in because it allows us to put a lot of that beer into cans and send it across the state and get it to folks like you guys. So from that standpoint, the canning aspect is really what's kind of saving our bacon right now in this current climate. Our tasting room is a fairly small tasting room. If anybody has been to Bozeman and come and visited us, you know how small it is. We've got a seating capacity of about 50 people, though when it's a busy Thursday or Friday, we'll maybe let more people than that in. But those cans are what keep us going and spread us across the state. And that's what you guys are getting a chance to enjoy right now.
So Mark, tell us your story of getting into the beer world, and were you a home brewer, or what happened?
Sure. My story is a little bit kind of non-traditional in that I grew up in Colorado, Denver, which is kind of a beer mecca, and had my first craft beer at 16. Had a very nice, friendly person.
Did you say 21?
That took care of finding me good craft beer that they enjoyed and would track that sort of stuff down. So I've grown up around it kind of always, and have always wanted to be involved in that world, but never really had an opportunity to do that. And originally I was a middle school teacher, taught social studies and math. I did that for 5 years. And when my wife and I moved up to Bozeman, it gave me an opportunity to kind of shift away and try something totally different. And I met our general manager, Tucker, at a tasting event at Montana Ale Works, which is one of our restaurants in Bozeman, and ended up talking with him for almost an hour at the event just about beer and their brewery and that sort of thing. And it turned out they were in the process of hiring their first salesperson. So I turned in a resume later that week and went in and had an interview, and then got a phone call saying that they had decided to go with somebody totally different. And obviously that's not how it ended up working out. They called me a month later and said that didn't quite work out, and would I still be interested in working for them? And now I am here. I've been with the company for 4 years this next month. So it's worked out really nicely. They're fantastic people to work with. They care about their employees. They care about the environment. They care about their community. It's a point of pride that I get to tell people I work for Bozone Brewing Company. So
you and I talked earlier this week about you only get questions pretty much around the state when you go to tastings about malt from people in Great Falls and Cascade County, because we're surrounded by barley fields, and we have Malt Europe in town. And so maybe kind of talk a little bit about that, if you would. Sure.
So from an ingredient standpoint, the malt stuff, everybody's kind of talked about it in various stages, but malt is that backbone of a beer. And for us, within that backbone of the beer, there's also a base malt that is a backbone of the beer. And we get ours from Malt Europe. It is their Montana blend. So it is coming from all across the state, but getting processed in just outside of Great Falls. And that's a pretty important aspect for our business is trying to connect as much to local ingredients when they're available to us, which is really nice from a malt standpoint. That's becoming more and more available. Malt Europe is great for base malts, but a lot of their specialty malts are not necessarily coming from Montana, and our new maltsters in Butte and in Bozeman that are starting to produce stuff with Montana barley that is getting malted in Montana, which is pretty cool too. The hop situation is also something that's developing in Montana. It's a climate that is not quite as ideal as, say, Yakima and the Washington area, like the Elysian guys were talking about yesterday, but it's not dissimilar either. And so there are hop farms popping up in the Big Fork area and here in Bozeman and up towards Kalispell. And that is giving us another opportunity to work with local hop providers as well. We still are sourcing a lot of our hops from the Washington and Oregon area. Depending on the style of beer that we're producing, we're also using hops from Czechia or the Czech Republic, from Germany, from New Zealand, from Australia. Just depends on the characteristics that we want to get out of those hops. For you wine drinkers, hops are also something that carries terroir in the same way that grapes do. And so you can have the same variety of hop that's grown in Washington as in Germany, and you'll have very different characteristics. You can tell that they're the same base hop, but you'll have a lot of New World hops, meaning stuff from North America, tends to have a more citrus, more fruit-forward characteristic than a lot of the Old World hops. Even if you're using the same variety, there's something about soil and climate here that pulls that out of the hops versus Europe being more kind of classic floral and spicy and traditional, what you expect when you think of like a German Pilsner or something like that.
Finally, something I can understand, like terroir and soil brings something different. I like it. Thank you.
Yep.
New world, old world.
Exactly. And the malt circumstance has some similarities as well, but the uniqueness from the malts end up being derived from the maltster and what they're doing with each of those characteristics, how much time and temperature they're putting into each variety of malt that goes into a beer. And most beers are going to have 3 or 4 or 5 different types of malt to give you different flavor characteristics, different colors, different mouthfeels are all results of the type of malt that are used. So within our beers and our lineup, we have a broad range of styles that we do. And it means we use a lot of specialty malts to hit on each of those characteristics. And the 3 beers that we're all tasting this evening are a great example of that distinction. The amber and the pale ale are both using a whole lot of that base pale malt from Malt Europe. The Kolsch is not. That one's using a whole lot of specialty Pilsner malt from Germany. And even with that in mind, the amber and the pale are both very distinctly different appearing beers because of the specialty malts that go into them as well.
So we have had discussions. My friend Ron, again, in Big Sky, says we haven't really even tasted a beer like we would taste wine. And so we're going to do that, but I don't want to get to that quite yet. But we're going to make sure that we taste each of these beers. We're going to talk about the flavors and the aromas and the mouthfeel. We already talked about this, Mark, but my question first is, what about cold glasses or neutral glasses, and then also shapes of glasses? We're doing different shapes just because we like different shapes. We don't really know what we're doing.
Sure. So from a glassware standpoint, it's not necessarily what a lot of people want to hear, but a room temperature glass is actually better for enjoying beer than a cold glass. The cold limits the flavor characteristics and the aroma of a beer. So ideally, you're pouring a cold beer into a room temperature glass. That's going to give you the best mix of open aromas and open flavors, accessible flavors and aromas. And as far as shape is concerned, you've got a fluted, like tall fluted glass. I'm drinking out of a tulip style glass. Pint glasses or shaker glasses are kind of the tradition in the US anyway. If you travel to any other country, particularly in Europe, shaker glasses are not used nearly as frequently. They have certain glassware for certain styles of beer, all that
Which
stuff.
I absolutely love, don't you? I think that's so cool. Like you go to a bar and they serve something in some beer in one shape and another in another shape, and even if it doesn't make a difference, it's to me it's more fun. It's like the wine world in
Yeah.
Riedel and what they've done, right?
Yeah, it's more experiential, I think, even if it doesn't impact the flavor, um, which a lot of the glassware really is designed around having some sort of impact either on the flavor or the appearance or the way that the head stays on the beer. It's it's still just an experience to drink out of something with an interesting shape to it, or having Kolsch, which is kind of one of the styles that we're drinking tonight, is traditionally served in little 8-ounce glasses, very narrow, straight up, and you just keep refilling that 8-ounce glass from a big pitcher at your beer hall table when you're in Cologne, in Germany. And that's part of the experience, is sharing that pitcher worth of beer with everybody. So it's very much that like social community aspect is part of that glassware thing too.
Yeah, I agree. Like in our restaurant, when we bring out a Stella chalice, all of a sudden we'll get 4 more Stella orders because it's served in a cool glass, you know, and with the logo. And so I think if more breweries would work on glassware, I think the Kalispell people do that pretty well. And I don't know if you guys do it in your tasting room or not, but the big dumb pint to me is just, I don't know. I don't like it. It's like serving wine in a red Solo cup or something, you know?
Sure, sure. It's a bit of a missed opportunity. We still use pint glasses because the same reason bars and restaurants do. They're durable. They're kind of what people expect. They're a lot more affordable than that delicate glassware. But we do have tulip glasses that we use for um, our specialty beers, or depending on kind of the serving size of what somebody orders, any of that sort of stuff to highlight. So there's definitely a critical aspect of that.
And by the way, we're giving away some of your pint glasses tonight with your logo on it, so I guess I should take that whole dumb thing back.
They're wonderful glasses, everybody. You'll be really happy when you get one.
Exactly. So let's talk about the beer in the glass. So the first one, oh yeah, and you can do screen sharing now, Tara said. So
Perfect.
and
So
talk about the first one, what is it, Select
first
Pale?
one was our Bozone Amber. This is the original beer from our brewery, and it was essentially made by Todd to be a knockoff of Fat Tire Amber from New Belgium Brewing, because in 2001, when the brewery opened, that was one of the most popular beers in the whole kind of Western US. And he wanted something that would hit like that one, but was made locally in Bozeman. So he made an attempt to kind of replicate that characteristic. Personally, like I said, I grew up in Colorado. I have drank a fair amount of Fat Tire. I like our Bozone more. I think it's got a nicer balance to it. It's got a little bit more sweetness, but also a little bit more bite than the Fat Tire does. And that's what makes it a great beer. So what I'm going to attempt to share with you right now is a sort of tasting note or process for tasting a beer. So Mark and I talked about this earlier today. There's a method for tasting wine. There's also technically a method for tasting beer. It might sound a little bit pretentious, but I find that it can really heighten the experience of the beer, which isn't to say that I won't just sit on a porch and slam beers on a sunny afternoon, because that's what it deserves. But when there's something that just really speaks to you, or you really want to dive into it, having a process and a method for tasting can be really helpful. So I'm going to attempt to screen share a score sheet, and we'll see how this works. So that is our BJCP score sheet that briefly got mentioned on Tuesday by the Kalispell folks, but it's an organization that organizes beer judges to judge homebrewing and commercial beers. And there's a structure for it. If you look at the sheet, you can see we start with aroma, then we move to appearance, then you comment on flavor, and mouthfeel is kind of the final thing that you pay attention to. And this sheet is specifically for judging. So there's a whole lot of like extra detail to it. But it also gives you a little bit of info about what some of these flavors are actually caused by and what they might be from your perception as a drinker in comparison to, sometimes it's hard to put words to what you're tasting, right? But if you have keywords in front of you, it can help you kind of puzzle out what you're getting from a beer. So that left side of the sheet is some of those characteristics. Those skew towards off flavors, things that you wouldn't necessarily want to detect in a beer. Not all of them, but some of them fall into that characteristic. But if you're interested, there are wheels of beer flavors, there are wheels of beer colors out there that you can Google and find, and that can be a really fun tool to have the next time you drink a beer. When you're like, what the hell is that flavor? There's something so unique about it, I can't put my finger on it. And you look at the sheet and you're like, oh, that tastes like a little bit like caramel to me. That must be what I'm getting out of that. So to start with, we'll look at Bozone Amber. And that is our signature beer, like I said. It's called amber because it looks amber. As a style, it's not really a traditional thing. It got started in the US during the 80s with the original round of craft breweries. But the name stuck from an appearance standpoint. And that's the kind of starting point is give the glass a swirl so you can, same as you would with wine, build up a little bit of the head on that, unlock some of the aromas, and give it a sniff. And just think about what you're smelling. Are you getting sweet flavors? Are you getting something sharp? Is it really subtle or is it very prominent? What are you getting out of that beer? And just kind of consider it yourself. At least for me, when I'm doing tastings with customers or sampling, bar and restaurant owners, I tend to keep my mouth shut until after they've had a chance to process. I don't want to contribute too much of my opinion of what a beer might be to them, because that's what makes beer amazing and such a universal beverage, is that everybody can enjoy it. Everybody can get something different out of it and still appreciate it. There's not really wrong or right answers when you're tasting beer, which is one of the things that I absolutely love about it. That means you don't say the wrong thing. You say what you're getting. You bounce ideas off of other people when you're sitting around the dinner table. When you're like, hey, I can't figure out what this is. Would you smell this? Would you taste it? Tell me what you're getting out of it. Because it's that thing of somebody saying, oh, that actually totally tastes like Fruity Pebbles to me. And you'd be like, what? That's not what I'm getting at all. But now that you've mentioned it, that's amazing. So Bozone Amber, I personally get some nice caramel notes. There's a little bit of a toasted bread thing going on. It has some sweetness built into it in the aroma. There's a subtle hop characteristic. I think it comes across as like slightly citrusy and slightly floral. It's not super prominent. From there, you'd look at the appearance and you'd say, all right, it's a nice, pretty amber color. You'd look at the head on the beer, which is part of the reason that you swirl it. Are there nice big bubbles? Are there really fine bubbles to it? What color is that head? Is it really clean and white? Is it tan? If you're drinking a stout, does it come across as like really dark? Those are all contributing characteristics as well. And then you move into flavor, which is that first primary thing that you think of when you are drinking beer is what does it taste like? So everybody give it another taste. I know you've spent a fair amount of time with it already, but you can give it another taste. And this is where you kind of get to reprocess. Are you getting similar flavors that you got out of the aroma, or is it the same as what you smelled before? For me, I find that the beer becomes less sweet on the palate than it smells. It's got a little bit more balance to it. There's more of that toasty than caramel like I get in the aroma. And it also has a nice kind of clean bitterness to it. It's
I was just going to say, I think at the end, there's some bitterness, right?
Yeah, and that bitterness to me gives it a nice balance. It doesn't come across as a super sweet beer on your tongue. And that's what kind of leads us into the last thing, is that mouthfeel. Is it really heavy? Does it sort of coat your tongue? Does it disappear really quickly? Do you feel the effervescence on the roof of your mouth? Do the hop characteristics and does that bitterness linger, or does it fade really quickly? Those are all the kind of final aspects. Do you get a bunch of like alcohol characteristic out of it? Does it feel like it evaporates off your tongue? All of those things are that mouthfeel.
I'm very uncomfortable with this whole beer thing. Like, used to just drink Bud Light and enjoy it or something. And you guys are just fancy as wine people now. Like, I don't. When did that happen? When do beer people get so fancy?
I think it is kind of been around for 30 years. It was just sort of underground. The wine characteristic sort of marketed itself as such, and beer continued being a Bud Light sort of thing. That even when you were drinking a craft beer, it was still with that Bud Light mindset of it's beer. It's a simple beverage. It's something you just enjoy after a day of hard work or being out on the river or whatever it might be. But there's a lot of room for everyone to kind of keep going with that one. That is what allows us to kind of process beer in multiple ways. Let me see if I can get you guys a score sheet. Hang on just a second. Let's see.
And then the next beer we should move on to, which is the what, pale ale?
Yeah.
Yes, so the pale ale will be our next one.
So Mark and I were talking earlier this week about this tasting, and a lot of times in wine we always go from light to darker, and then sometimes at the end we'll kind of throw in a sparkling wine just to kind of lighten up the palate. And so that was his suggestion today. That's why we're doing the Kolsch honey last, because he thought maybe lightening up the palate would be fun. So anyway, thank you. I see you shared that. So
yeah, so everybody's got that now. Perfect. So I wanted to do something a little counterintuitive with the tasting. A lot of the times you'd start from lightest to darkest. I imagine that's a little bit of I guess the last 2 days have kind of been all over the place too. We had a bunch of IPAs yesterday, and the day before we started with a Dunkel, but it's kind of the lightest things that they offered anyway. So we're shifting a little bit today too. We're starting with kind of the darkest, maltiest beer out of the bunch, and we'll eventually transition to the kind of lightest, easiest one. So the next beer that we'll look at is the Gallatin Pale Ale. It's our Bright Buchanan. It is a personal favorite of mine. It's kind of my go-to beer if I'm not drinking one of the random seasonals, which we do kind of a variety of that sort of stuff as well. Pale is what I've got in my fridge all the time. There's usually a pale at the end of a shift. It's probably the most popular beer out of employees at the brewery for that matter. And for good reason, as you guys will find out, it's a super drinkable, very light, very refreshing, but hoppy beer. So it hits a nice balance point as well. The other thing that I love about this beer, and it ties into us as a business, it's a fundraiser beer. So anytime you buy a 6-pack of Gallatin Pale or you order a pint of it at the bar, and you can actually see it printed on our little description on the side, you can read the little story about it. And the GPA just stands for Gallatin Pale Ale. So in nomenclature started with APA, and it was the American Pale Ale because there were the Pale Ale originated in England, and America obviously made its own innovation, made it much hoppier, much more kind of aggressive than an English style Pale Ale. And so it started out as an APA, but we're not just Americans, we're Montanans, and specifically we're in Gallatin County, and we got the river running right through the county as well. And so we called it the Gallatin Pale Ale, and that's where GPA comes from. So with that kind of in mind, it's a fundraiser for our Watershed Council. in the Gallatin area. They take care of and advocate for the Gallatin River, the Madison, the Jefferson, and I'm missing another one in there, Beaverhead, I believe. So everything kind of in our watershed before it hits the Missouri. And that is something that we do as a whole, is a lot of community outreach. This is just one example of that, but it's another reason I'm proud to work for the brewery. So from a tasting standpoint, we can kind of move into the Gallatin Pale. So give her a swirl, give it a sniff, see what kind of characteristics you get out of it. Does it come across with the same kind of malt characteristic that we got at the beginning of the Bozone Amber? Does it have a caramel characteristic, or is it a little bit more hoppy, citrusy, kind of bright aroma to it instead of the maltier, sweeter character that we got out of the Bozone? And that's by design. The Gallatin Pale is supposed to be a hoppy beer. The pale ale part of it means it's not supposed to beat you over the head with its hoppiness or its bitterness, but it's still supposed to have that nice prominent aroma. And to me, it comes across very citrusy, very bright, kind of this vague sort of tropical characteristic to it. And that's because of a technique called dry hopping that we use and the specific types of hops that we're using in that beer. Amarillo and Citra are both kind of specialty hop breeds or varieties, and they get used very extensively in this beer to contribute that citrusy kind of bright characteristic. What you'll notice as well when we get to the tasting, I'll stop myself, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's move from aroma. Appearance, obviously a very different appearance to it in comparison to the Bozone. This is why it is called a pale ale, is that it is paler in color. Even with that in mind, our pale ale is on the paler end of the spectrum. If you've ever had Lewis and Clark and a prickly pear, it's on comparison darker. It's still a pale ale, there's range, but their prickly pear is not as dark as our Bozone Amber. It's not as light as our Gallatin Pale. So it puts things, that's where the name came from. It still means there's a range. There's kind of room to interpret. Each brewery figures out what they want their pale to look like, what they want their amber to look like.
And how do you influence color in the brewing process?
Sure. So color is coming exclusively from the malts that we're using. This is all about kind of blending those specialty malts. The pale malt is the biggest aspect of what goes into this beer, and that's the malt that we end up getting from Malt Europe, like I was talking about earlier. We put in a little bit of specialty malt. It's very low. I want to say it's a C40, so really minimal kind of color to it, just to add a little bit to it so it doesn't come across super pale. But malt is where that's coming from. So the amber and that beautiful color was all because of the specialty malts that we're using. When you're drinking a porter, it is because of those specialty malts that we're integrating into that beer. That's color is exclusively because of the malt that is getting used in each type of beer. And a lot of it comes down to how those malts mix together. And they're also what contributes to the head of the beer. Depending, you can kind of see it with mine. I poured this beer a half hour ago. It still has a nice bright head to it. That comes from the type of malts that are going into that beer. The malts contribute protein. That's what keeps the head active. And that varies between each type of beer too. So next step.
The head is important in keeping the flavor in the beer, or tell us about why you want to.
Sure. That is a fantastic question. It does kind of two steps. It's really important for conveying aromatics. So you've probably heard the adage that like 60% of taste is smell. It's accurate. And so getting proper aroma out of your beer is going to make that beer taste more kind of the way you want it to taste. And part of that is head. that carbonation and those bubbles staying there. They keep that aroma in place. And then secondly, it does act as a protective barrier. Oxygen is not good for the kind of long-term quality of a beer, but it actually has an impact almost immediately. So the longer you can keep the head on the beer, that barrier of CO2-y bubbles, the less oxygen is able to contact the beer itself. And so you end up with a beer that tastes fresher for longer, even while it's in the glass. And a great way of kind of comparing that, if you've got a beer that you don't mind kind of letting go to waste, is to pour some into a glass and walk away for half an hour. Taste it when you first pour it with the head on there, and then walk away for a half hour, let the head dissipate, and go back and taste it again. And see if it comes across as exactly the same beer. It's probably going to be different. It's going to be less impactful. So that gets us to our taste point. Let me check on the
Are we doing the Kolsch now?
So we can taste our Gallatin Pale, and then we'll move on to the Kolsch. And then if there's any other kind of questions from anybody, we can follow up.
There was a question about how many breweries are in Bozone.
I've got that written down.
Oh, do you?
You guys can't hear us whispering, can you?
No, not right now.
No. I don't think so.
So there was a question about keeping beer in a barrel. With that in mind, it kind of depends on the age aspect. Comes down to what type of beer it is. So we produce sort of two very different styles of beer at our brewery. The more traditional ones, which we're enjoying today, these are all beers that we put a date on our cans. If you notice, hopefully there's a date printed on kind of the lower edge of each of the cans that you guys got. Sometimes our printer doesn't work, you know how that goes. But what we try and say with that sort of circumstance, beer should be drank as fresh as possible. So with our cans, we put a date of when it went into that can, and we recommend drinking it within 4 months. Our kegs, we recommend drinking within 90 days, so 3 months. And it's all about making sure that you're getting the freshest, tastiest, most like worth drinking beer for your money. Like, we're not here just to get money from you. We want you to value your experience. And the other aspect to it is, like, we give a shit about what we're putting out there. And
Mark, hold on just a minute.
Go for it.
You guys should think about doing the aging thing, because I get to sell bottles that are old for a lot more money.
So that gets me to my second standpoint, and I'll share another photo for you guys. Let me see if I can find it. Where did it go? There it is. So that one, we have, hopefully that's presenting properly. Is that a whole bunch of barrels?
Yes, sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
Yes, it looks good.
So we also have a whole secondary aspect of our brewery. We have the largest barrel aging program in the state. We have a cellar underneath our basement, not under the basement, underneath our brewery. And we've got over 250 barrels down there. And we age sour beers in that barrel. So you're seeing a little bit of that. That's part of our crew celebrating a medal win for one of our beers. But we do age beers. There are beers downstairs right now that are 4 years old and have been in those barrels, and we're getting ready to bottle them. And that bottling process, from that standpoint, we do bottle our sours. If that's a style of beer that people are interested in, we can definitely send some to Mark and Kathy and make sure that they've got it available for you guys. That's a very different circumstance. The aging is what makes each of those beers very unique. And that's a great question too. The sour stuff develops over time. That is very different from our kind of more traditional styles of beer. And those flavors and characteristics happen because of that aging. The beer that Eagle gets ideally doesn't get old. It's a matter of being careful about how much beer they order, how much beer we send them, tracking inventories. It's a process between the two of us as organizations to make sure that they're not sitting on beer that gets old because they've spent money on it that will go to waste if it does get old. And we don't want someone encountering one of our beers when it does taste old. So it's very much a back and forth and a balance point between the two of us that make that work, that keep the beer as fresh as possible.
And also, Mark, our mortgage depends on this. So,
Yeah,
it's important to your bottom line to ours, right? I mean,
exactly.
we want a good beer, right?
Exactly. And that's the other good part of it, is that when it comes down to it, the retailer, and for that matter, the consumer, is becoming more aware of all of the importance of that there are things that are capable of aging, there are things that are not, and everybody knows how much it matters now all the way down the line. And that's why everybody's on board with it. And like Mark just said, it's not to their interest to sell old beer. They want you guys to keep coming back in because you enjoyed it, not because it tasted flat or because it tasted old or whatever it might be. So with that in mind,
This is getting long, Mark.
sure.
And I'm really enjoying it. And so you guys can jump off if you're not, but we're going to keep going for a little while. Because I also have a couple other questions you and I talked about, like the saturation of the craft beer market and, whatever. So let's just taste this last beer and then we can keep talking for a while. And
Yeah. So
if people are bored, they can go away, right?
yeah, if I tend to get chatty. So if I'm, as you already noticed, if I'm rambling, that just hit.
You're doing great, man. I love it. So yeah, let's just talk. We're good.
That's the right response there. You got 6-packs. Everybody should be good. We can hang out for a while, right?
Right.
So the next beer that we're going to look at is the Hey Bear Honey Kolsch. This one is a departure from the other two for a number of reasons, and it'll actually give us a chance to talk about yeast, which we haven't discussed yet. So Hey Bear, you can tell, is even paler than our Gallatin Pale. If you give it a sniff, you're going to get some like kind of light malty notes. There's almost a little bit of like, what's the right word? Like grassy, sort of green character to it.
A little bit of jalapeno maybe, or kind of the peppery side.
Sure. And a little bit of, I could totally see a pepper thing going on. So this is a style of beer that originated in Cologne, Germany. That's where the name Kolsch comes from. And it is kind of a unique beer in that from an ingredient standpoint, it's very simple and very similar to a Pilsner. It uses almost exclusively Pilsner malt, depending on the brewery. We're using exclusively Pilsner malt, which is a really light malt. It adds a nice sort of like honey, white bread characteristic to the flavor. And then we're using German malts, or German hops as well. And those hops tend to be kind of traditional floral and sort of spicy or peppery, which is what Mark picked up on. And very clean. The bitterness that's there is like just enough to make sure that the beer isn't sweet, but it's not aggressive like you might have gotten out of the pale ale. It's a lot lighter and easier and kind of bright and refreshing in comparison. So that ingredient-wise, very similar to a Pilsner. But what sets a Kolsch apart is the fact that instead of using lager yeast, like you guys heard about during the Kalispell talk on Tuesday, we're using a ale yeast and we're fermenting that ale yeast at lager temperatures. So traditionally lagering, and in German, it just means to keep. What they would do was build massive cellars under breweries and store the beer down there to condition. They were doing this back in the 15th century. So it's been happening and around for a very long time. But that's the idea behind lagering, is you get something that is colder and kept for longer, and you end up with a cleaner characteristic out of the beer because of that colder and longer period of time. And what ended up happening with the Kolsch was not having access to lager yeast, having access to ale yeast, which likes slightly warmer fermentation temperatures. And this is a relative term. We're talking like a 10 to 15 degree difference between the fermentation temperatures. So it's not one of those like ale yeast likes hot temperatures and lager yeast likes cold temperatures. It's a lot closer, but warmer and slightly cooler. And it also is more active because of that warmer temperature. It contributes more flavor characteristics, what's referred to as esters. They're byproducts of the fermentation product, just like alcohol and carbonation are, like they mentioned yesterday. Esters are also another byproduct, and they're actually flavor contributors. And in Cologne, they didn't have access to lager yeast, but they saw the popularity of the Pilsner and lager style beers, and they wanted to replicate it. So they used an ale yeast, but they did the fermentation at a cooler temperature. And so you end up with something that has a really nice kind of clean, crisp characteristic to it, like you get out of a Pilsner, but it also has a little bit of like extra oomph to it. There's a little bit of a like slightly fruity, more aromatic character than you typically get out of a Pilsner. And that is because of that yeast being used at a slightly different temperature than it's used to. And so you end up with this sort of hybrid style of beer, which is really kind of fun, a fairly uncommon thing to occur. The only other really significant style that uses this, and by significant, most people don't know about it anyway, but the steam style of beer, or the common. If anyone's ever heard of Anchor Steam out of San Francisco, it's the same idea. They use an ale yeast or a lager yeast, but they ferment at slightly warmer temperatures. So you end up with this hybrid mixture in the Kolsch or in steam style beer. So kind of unique. This is our summer crushable. You'll notice on the can, it's our lawnmower beer. This is for yard work and gardening and all that sort of stuff.
And
so
what is there honey? Tell us a story about the honey part.
So the honey aspect was also another like local ingredient circumstance. There are beekeepers here in Bozeman that we work with and get honey from. The name, of course, is blanking me right now, so I'll have to look that one up. But per barrel or per batch worth of this beer, so we're doing a 20 barrel batch at a time, we're putting in 5 gallons worth of honey. And to me, I think it adds a little bit of like depth of flavor without adding a ton of sweetness. It is something that we're doing pre-fermentation rather than post-fermentation. So the sugar aspect of the honey is getting fermented out. It makes for a kind of drier beer, and it doesn't leave a lot of residual sweetness. But you still get that like honey flavor rather than honey sweet, which I personally prefer. Not overly sweet, very crushable, easy to drink beer that has a nice honey character to it. Cook's, thank you. That's very helpful. So it's Cook's honey. Thank you, Google people. So that is that's our Hay Bear. So kind of third beer of the night. And I, like I said kind of earlier, and Mark mentioned, I wanted to transition us to something light and bright and kind of refreshing and easy to drink.
Yeah, if we were in the wine world, this is the equivalent of doing maybe a aperitif at the end, you know, like some party soda or something, or you know, like sometimes we transition away from beer, from wine even, and just go into, you know, a nice liqueur.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I talked about earlier about the kind of the amount of actual beer makers in Montana, in the U.S., and what's going on in kind of the market, and kind of you mentioned that maybe people, beer drinkers especially, are getting very I don't know if snobby is the right word, but they want something new all the time. You're always having to chase the next new beer, and so maybe you could expound on that.
Sure. I imagine it's something that a lot of you guys see when you go to the Great Falls breweries as well, that there's a constantly rotating lineup of new beers that somebody's putting out. And part of that comes from the brewery, to be honest. There's enjoyment and excitement about coming up with new recipes and creating something different. But part of it is also just the market, that because there are so many breweries out there, the consumer has gotten very used to being able to try a new beer every single time they go to the grocery store or they go to
Did
the
you
brewery.
tell me there was 13 breweries in Bozeman now or something?
Yeah, and I think somebody asked that earlier, but yes, there are 13 breweries just in the Bozeman area, and Belgrade. We're factoring Belgrade in there as well. And we've got 2 more that are either under construction or in planning. And, you know, we're Bozeman, we're definitely a beer kind of town. And even that is starting to feel like almost too many breweries. At the same time, we're, I think, wonderfully in a state that per capita has the 2nd most breweries in the whole country. The only place that beats us is Vermont. And Vermont's got a hell of a lot more surrounding population than we do that makes it make sense there. So we know that Montanans love drinking. They love drinking beer. And what it comes down to is having each brewery kind of find its niche, figure out what makes the most sense for everybody. And in Bozeman, there's enough people and enough of a beer kind of community, and as you know, the rest of Montana knows, Bozeman's the place that out-of-state people like to move to. And I think that's part of the reason that there's so many breweries here, is that there's all those folks from Minnesota and Colorado and California that we all love, but that they're interested and want to drink a whole lot of different beer. And that's starting to spread out across the state. And it means that Great Falls has got more breweries than you might think is feasible, but each of those breweries is doing its own sort of unique thing that makes it work, that makes each of them sustainable. And it's the same idea we were talking about a brewery opening out in Fort Benton. And you're like, there's only 2,000 people out there. How is that going to work? Those 2,000 people, they probably want to drink beer too. And if they can drink beer that's made just down the street from them, they're going to be excited and happy to do it. And if that brewery in Fort Benton wants to kind of take care of their community, and that's the extent of their desires as a brewery, they don't want to be the next Big Sky or the next New Belgium. They just want to be the place that their neighbor goes to and has a beer. They're going to be totally fine. It's that tricky thing of finding a balance point and knowing what you can do unique, and either that's serving your community or changing things up and being the brewery that makes sour beers because you love sour beers, or you're the brewery that totally kills it at making New England style IPAs. Nobody can match that. Those are your niches, and that's what's going to separate a brewery.
Well, I think I'm out of questions. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
This way.
We have Tara's going to do the drawing again, and our friend Mark here has volunteered a hoodie from Bozeman Brewing Company. Well, maybe we got it. And I think, what is it, a hat too, you said? Yeah, there we go.
Hoodie and a hat. We got our Drink Till MT logo on there, which I think is pretty sweet.
Turns out Mark Tronson won that. That's weird.
And we got a classic Bozone hat as well. America colors.
And then we have some really bad pint glasses, apparently.
And some, we've got one of our like original signature swing top growlers,
Right.
which are fantastic for keeping beer fresh. The swing top is awesome for carbonation. So we'll raffle one of those off, and you guys can use it to get filled up at Fifth and Wine.
So we raffled. I mean, we did that last night and we sent an email out, and apparently some of you didn't win. Sorry about that. It just happens sometimes. Not everybody can be a winner in life, right? So look at Tara's email. We said who won last night. See what else. Oh, people have been asking me about what my favorite beer has been so far. Tara just put that on the chat, and it's obviously one of Bozeman Brewing Company's tonight.
She said no tonight.
I I have to say, I think maybe the last one, maybe the Kolsch. I don't know, whatever. I think what's interesting to me is that I learned so much about beer is that it can be different, like Sauvignon Blanc and Viognier and Pinot Noir. Like I drink all those all the time, and I don't necessarily pick a favorite, right? Just it's just fun to finally learn a little bit about beer, and that the tasting difference is huge. Like tonight was you could definitely tell every single beer was different, and I love that. And you could pair it with different foods. Mark, you and I talked about that earlier today too.
Yeah.
If I was doing this honey Kolsch, I'd put a big heavy cheese with it. I think that'd be fun, like a Taleggio or
Yep. Yeah,
that
something
kind of wipes
counter.
it away, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So I think you can you can always find something to pair with these beers too. It's been fun. So I think that's it. Oh, I guess it's you. It's a different Mark. She wants to know what your favorite beer is.
Oh, me, Mark.
It actually was your friend from Lewis and Clark.
Oh,
Daniel.
okay.
Oh, Daniel. Nice.
It's a bit of a cop out, but I enjoy the beer that I'm drinking.
Nice.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
But out of this evening,
No. I think what she's saying is you can't pick anything from you guys.
Oh, just favorite in general.
A different one,
Ooh,
right?
Geez, that gets way more complicated. Oh man, I still kind of have to go back. I mentioned it earlier of like starting to drink beers in high school, and that's still one of my absolute favorites for like nostalgia and memory that it triggers. And that is not Fat Tire, but Easy Street Wheat, which is made by Odell's Brewing Company. It's not a beer that they send up here, unfortunately, so I haven't gotten to have it on a regular basis anyway. When I go home and see family in Colorado, I usually snag some of that. But considering that is 20 years ago, and that's still one of my favorite beers, that's how much beer can kind of connect with you, I think, which is pretty amazing to think about.
Right. I told a story earlier in one of the wine sessions that I was in Missoula for a tasting with a Burgundy lady who wasn't real nice. And she said, I kept asking her questions. She would just snap at me. And finally I said, well, which one of these is your favorite wines? And she's like, well, which one of your children is your favorite? I'm like, well, it depends on the week. So,
Yeah. As Tara's like waving in the corner.
Right.
All three are on tonight too.
Oh, there we go.
All right. Well, I think that's it, guys. Thank you so much. Tomorrow night we have, who do we have, Tara? Lewis and Clark, I think, right?
Yep, Dan, yeah.
Yeah, Lewis and Clark. So thank you so much, Mark. You were amazing, and
Thank you.
a wealth of information, and we really appreciate your time, and thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really super enjoyable to spend some time with people that are interested in tasting beers and trying something new. Thank you for that. Like I said, I've been missing it, so this was a much needed dose of interaction and camaraderie over beer. So thank you. Cheers to everybody else too.
Cheers to everybody.
Cheers. Yeah.
As a last sort of thing for me, if anyone does have like additional questions about the brewery, if there was like something I vaguely touched on and you were like super curious about, I have an email. You can feel free to send that. I'll add it to the chat list too. It's very straightforward, but it always helps to have something kind of written down. And I will happily try and answer questions, or if I don't know the answer, I'll find somebody more knowledgeable than me and I'll get it from them. So thank you again. I really appreciate it.